Oh, great. You can hear us.
Yes, unfortunately have something in the way of the screen. Anyway, one of the people who signed in is George Schaller, the pioneer who did the first studies on gorillas, on panda bears. He is one of the most amazing biologists in the world. Very honored to have him here. Roy Halpern and some other names I recognize. Anyway, it's a privilege that you guys have decided to join this, and we'll have a chance to watch it in full on the YouTube.
Great. So I'm just going to walk through some of the questions that came up during the episode. The first question was a question around bear tourism. One of the participants noticed that you maybe seemed a little bit frustrated with some bear tourism, and I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about your feelings around bear tourism, or maybe if there are ways to do it in a specific way.
Well, like anything else, it can be too much of a good thing. I've been taking people out to see bears, which is bear tourism, for half a century. When we first started out there at Hallow Bay, there were only a few people doing it, so that was no problem. But it's become inundated. Some of the other places I've been, we used to have bears all over the place, everybody could watch. But there are now so many tourists out there trying to get close to get photographs, that's chasing the bears away. So during the COVID, when we had almost nobody out there, this one meadow had like 50 bears in it. Now that we have a lot of people back there out there, most of the bears are gone. They're not in the meadows, which means they're not in their main mating area. So this really changes the dynamic of the social relationships. So there's nothing against bear tourism. It needs to be kept within the tolerance of the bears. Unfortunately, there is so much money in it that everybody's, well, we're going to get out what we can, get rich off of it as fast as we can. And then when that's dead, we'll go someplace else and do something else.
Thank you. Okay, and then you showed the video of the bear who found your laundry. Someone asked about a hump of fur behind that bear's head. They were wondering if that's normal.
I think what they're referring to is the hump over the shoulders. Grizzly bears, brown bears, two names, same animal, do a lot of digging. This requires a lot of musculature in the shoulders. And so they build up this hump on the back, but it's perfectly normal. Some bears have a large hump, some ones have a small hump.
Okay, thank you. There was some appreciation for your thoughts around listening and paying attention to bears. So I just wanted to call that out, that it was noticed and appreciated. And then another person asked, how common is it for black bears to eat other black bears? And maybe I'll expand that and say, how common is it for bears to eat other bears as well?
I don't know how to quantify that. I'll say that I've seen it on the average of maybe once every 10 years or 5 to 10 years. So I would say it's a common thing in the sense that it occurs in all species and populations. When the bears have no other food, they'll turn to whatever they can find, and sometimes that's another bear. In that particular case with Black Brugo, he was skeletally the largest black bear I've ever seen. This meant that for him to subsist on berries that were a feast for a smaller bear, he could hardly make a living. So he wised up and started killing other bears and eating them. But it happens now and then, but it's certainly not something you can expect to see. You know, I've had probably 20,000 close encounters, and I've seen it maybe 5 times.
Okay. Let's see his name. Roy Halpern made a note about the differences between coastal brown bears and interior brown bears, which we've talked a little bit about in some of our literature as well. Alaska Wilderness League has put together some information about bears, which you can find on our website. And I was curious if you could talk a little bit more about the personal space bubbles of bears, depending on where they are.
The idea that the coastal brown bear is different from the interior grizzly in terms of basic personality is an idea that Tom Smith and I hashed around almost 30 years ago. And he and Steve Herrera eventually published a paper on that about 2005. But if you look at the history of bears, going back to California in the 1800s, going to Yellowstone National Park during the 60s and 70s when the Craigheads were doing research there at the garbage dumps, you see a lot of the similarities in behaviors to what we find here on the coastal bears. And people will draw a distinction between coastal brown bears and interior grizzly bears, which sounds good in Alaska, but you go down the coast to British Columbia, they call them all grizzlies there. Same down in Washington, Oregon, down in California, they all called those grizzlies. They didn't call them brown bears. Yet they're all bears feeding on salmon, same situations we find here in Alaska. In fact, during the 1800s, before the gold rush came in, there were much higher numbers of salmon than you currently have up in Alaska in most areas. The Sacramento River going up through the Central Valley, spreading out from there, you had enormous runs of salmon, except that there they occurred in the spring and summer rather than during the winter and spring rather than during the summer as we have, because that was the period they had their most of the water. So all we can really say is that where bears feed close together on a regular basis, they develop more tolerance for each other. We call that habituation. Where they're near people a lot, they can habituate too. People at Yellowstone National Park who used to watch the bears at the garbage dumps generally didn't have any problem with them if they didn't crowd close. The biggest problems occurred after they closed the dumps, but it's a much more complex issue than I can really get into here. The fact is, well-fed bears tend to be fairly easy to get along with if they're not afraid of you. They have to respect you, but you don't want them seeing you as a predator. Now, any bear, if it's really hungry, is going to be much more pushy about getting food from you or defending food against you. So there are a number of factors that go on and make bear viewing fairly safe on the coast. It has to do with the amount of food. It has to do with the habitual way they interact with people. And it has to do with the number of people we usually view in groups. And nobody in a group of 5 or more people has ever been attacked by a bear. And most viewing occurs in groups at least that large. But there are several factors involved. So that's why I write books on this, is try to explain these details.
Okay, thank you. Another question that came up was so there were the 3 cubs, I think, in the tree at the sort of near the end of your video. And people wanted to know if the 3rd cub also came down, if you got all 3, because we only saw the 2 in the video later on in the video.
Okay, those were not my cubs. Those
okay.
Those were 2 other cubs much more recently. As I said, back in those days, we didn't have video.
Okay.
Right.
They were adorable.
Yeah, I was on a boat taking the pictures, and my clients were getting their pictures, so the boat was rocking madly. It was hard to salvage any footage out of that. But the eagle did hit 1 cub and knock it out of the tree.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, it's not a good situation for the bear cubs.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, okay. And then this was another question. I think it's inspired a little bit maybe from your sheep story. Do bears ever adopt other cubs in the wild?
Yes.
And okay, yeah, tell us about it.
There are several cases that have been noticed where a female will have multiple age cubs with her, where the difference in age between them is too close to be successive litters. They've also documented case where mothers have spontaneously adopted. And when we find orphan cubs, sometimes what we'll do is find a female that's hibernating, and we'll rub Vicks Vapor Rub on her nose so that she can't really smell well. And we'll put the cub in with her. And then by the time she really wakes up and smells, it's covered with her body odor, and she accepts it. It turns out even with sheep, it's not that the mother imprints on the odor of her lamb so much as it is that the lamb smells like her. So if
Huh.
you're bringing a foundling, it's really getting her odor all over it. That seems to be the key.
Wow. And will it, is it possible for like grizzlies to adopt black bears, or always same type of bear?
I have never heard of a grizzly adopting a black bear. I can't say it wouldn't occur in a zoo, but adoption is a fairly uncommon thing.
Okay.
It happens. It's just, you could say that an animal has an instinct to only adopt its own kind, or to only take care of its own cubs. But as with people, um, there are many things involved, and one is the maternal drive. And if the female has a really strong maternal drive, adoption satisfies her better than no cub at all.
Naomi mentioned that there was a case in Katmai, I don't know when, but a bear adopted a abandoned yearling as well.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that, but I know up at Diving Bear Cove where I worked, we saw a female adopt a cub that was 1 year older than her cubs. It tried for weeks to try to get her to accept it. She kept chasing it off, and finally she got, so she nursed it.
Huh. Sounds like that was in 2014.
And that was back in 2004.
And yours was 2000. Okay. So we have another question about, if you do surprise a bear, what would you recommend people do if they accidentally surprise a bear?
I've surprised bears on numerous occasions, and most of those bears were ones that were relatively used to people. And what I do then is I just stop, stand still, do not stare at the bear, stare off to the side. So I'm just watching the bear with peripheral vision, such as like that, and just keep quiet. And if the bear doesn't get too upset, I start to back away. And when you move away, you do not walk backwards, because you can trip. You don't turn away from the bear and have your back to it. You walk sideways. So you can glance towards the bear, glance at the ground, glance towards the bear, glance at the ground, and just hitch away. The bear starts getting really upset, then you stand your ground. And as soon as the bear calms down, then you start moving away. This tells the bear that you will move away as long as it lets you do so. I see John Phillips is on here, like Roy Halpern. He's another great photographer. We have a website, Bear Viewing Association, on Facebook, and John is just fills it with the most beautiful pictures of black bears you've ever seen.
All right. Well, that looks like we've gone through all the questions, and I know that this episode has gone a little late this evening, so I might just close really quickly by saying thank you so much, Stephen. This video you made for us for Geography of Hope is just fantastic, and I loved it. We will have it up for everyone to view after the show, and I will find a way to put the Q&A together with it so people can see the Q&A as well. And I also want to thank all the participants for celebrating Alaska with us tonight. It's one of the things that makes Alaska so truly special, in addition to places like the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, where we can see brown, black, and polar bears all in one habitat, is that we do have these vast connected landscapes where wildlife still have the room to roam and thrive. So thank you so much for helping us protect Alaska lands and waters. And if you would, please do feel free to and willing to donate to Stephen's work protecting bears, and we will send a link for his email for you to be able to do that. And we also will send you a link to donate to Alaska Wilderness League to support our work. Thank you again, and look forward to the email. Yes, Stephen, do you have one other thing to add?
Yes. So the book Beauty Within the Beast is now on as an ebook. So all the pictures now are in color as opposed to the hard copy, which are all black and white. Some new material in there. And fortunately, we've already got one donor who's donated $2,000 towards our $50,000 goal. It takes a lot of money to cover the costs of what we're doing, And we really appreciate anybody who can help us and join in this effort and hopefully share in the benefits of it. And again, thank you all for joining. It's been a pleasure to see so many people interested, and I hope that what you learn from this will make it much easier for you to enjoy being out in the wilds with bears.
Thank you, everyone. We'll send links out for everything we can, probably tomorrow. Take care. Thanks so much, Stephen.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.